And it's a good opportunity to have here different people involved in the topic of plastic pollution, but on this time talking from a different point of view of the scientific one. We are going today to discuss in details the aspect related to policy, plastic governance, because this is the starting point to have different policies for the future and to build the future that we need. Just an anecdote for today, we tried to have a plastic-free event, and it took us really difficult to find bottles of glass for the water. So actually we visit different places, and because we cannot have a plastic event discussing about plastic with plastic bottles, it was impossible. We didn't find it. It took us like different places to finally say, okay, we have to take it because it's not easy to have it. So just this a small anecdote to show that sometimes even when the people, the consumers, the users, they want to have different habits of consumption, it's not easy because they don't have the options. So if we don't have the option to buy products in different than in plastic, we took this option because it's the only that we have. So everything starts by the policy side and to discuss what we need, what are the gaps, and what is the roadmap for the next decade. So with that introduction, I would like to introduce to Mathilde. Mathilde Maure is a policy and project officer in CPRM, in the Atlantic Arc Commission. She will explain it from her experience all the state of the policies on plastics in the European Union. So with that, I will ask to Mathilde to come to the stage. Welcome.
I particularly work for the Atlantic Arc Commission of the CPMR. So the CPMR is an association of 150 member regions working especially with EU institutions, and we act as a think tank, a lobby, and a forum for our members with more than 50 years experience on the sustainable development of the Atlantic area, also the North Sea, the Mediterranean, etc., all the sea basins of Europe. We work mainly on transport, renewable energy, plastic pollution, etc. There are many topics we deal with, and we try to raise the voice of the regions for the new institutions in order to take more into account their needs. So today I'm going to present you a bit all the context and all the legislations that exist around plastic pollution at the international level, as you can see here, but also then at the European level, the national level, and more specifically, the regional level. So there are many international conventions that exist, but actually so far none of them is specifically on plastic pollution. All these conventions that you see here, they mention a bit plastic pollution, but none of them is only about this. So I'm going to start with talk a bit on the Convention of the Prevention of Marine Pollution by Dumping of Waste and Other Matter. The names are usually very long. It was adopted in 1972, and it mainly regulates permitted materials for dumping. Now there are new evolutions, and they are starting to include plastic as a material that cannot be dumped anymore in water. There is also a very interesting convention called the Basel Convention on the Control of Transboundary Movements of Hazardous Waste, adopted in 1988-1989. And parties have the obligation to take appropriate measures to reduce generation of hazardous waste and other waste and ensure the availability of adequate disposal facilities. So it's very interesting because since an amendment adopted in 2019, this one, plastic waste has been considered as hazardous, and more plastic materials are covered by the convention. This amendment became effective in 2021, so for the moment we still have to wait a bit to see if it will be really effective on a long-term basis to fight plastic pollution. But it is really promising. Then there is the OSPAR Convention for the Protection of the Marine Environment of the Northeast Atlantic of 1992. this is a really, really interesting convention because it has been ratified by all the interested states, so from Spain to Denmark and Norway, covering all the Atlantic area. And it contains an annex on the prevention and elimination of pollution from inland sources. The idea is to avoid dumping or incineration plastic materials. The OSPAR Secretariat, the Secretariat of the Convention, follows data on plastic pollution. They create a lot of data on this, of the composition of beach litter, of plastic particles ingested by various species on wastewater state, etc. So it is really an interesting tool for then the political side to use to make more policies after that. And the OSPAR Convention also agreed to develop a regional action plan on marine litter in 2014 with a list of 32 actions to implement by 2021 to reduce marine litter, including plastic. Then, of course, you probably all know them, but the United Nations adopted the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, and one of them, the SDG 14, focuses on marine litter and on plastic. Each year, the United Nations releases a report on each SDG implementation. However, it is not very positive for 2023 because the UN stated that because of the various crises that happened since 2-3 years, there have been less commitment to reduce plastic pollution, and it has been harder due to economic problems, also after the COVID-19 pandemics, the war in Ukraine, etc. Then the UN also adopted a resolution to end plastic pollution, so we see that at the global level there's really a will to, or at least the idea, to reduce plastic pollution. This is important because then all these resolutions, they will be translated into more European, national and regional regulation. Also, in the past 2 years, this is really, really interesting. States have been negotiating to adopt a high seas treaty. And it had fruitful results because the agreement was adopted on 20 September 2023. And this treaty is interesting for plastic pollution, even though it won't concern it. But the idea of the treaty is to have more marine protected areas in the high seas at a global level, which could have, of course, an impact on plastic flows. Then, last but not least, in 2023, and a bit before, there have been negotiations on the creation of a treaty on plastic pollution, so only dedicated to this. This is very, very positive. Even though the negotiations are intended to be easy, it might take a bit of time. But in November 2023, there will be the third meeting of the states for the negotiations. So I really invite you to follow a bit the actualities with this, because it could be of utmost importance for the work of all stakeholders on plastic pollution. Unfortunately, yes, I cannot tell you much more on the international context because we don't have yet this treaty on plastic pollution. We hope to have it by the end of 2024. So yeah, let's stay in touch for this. And yeah, as you can see, there are many treaties at the international level, but the international level usually takes a lot of time to actually implement concrete actions. So we should, however, stay positive and think that then, at the European level, there are a lot of legislation, as you can see. So don't be too scared. We will check a bit all those legislations together. So, as you all know, in 2019, the EU presented the EU Green Deal package that sets the objective to reduce plastic pollution, among others. And the EU institutions, after that, engaged in a revision process of many of already existing legislations. That's why here you have a mix of newly adopted legislations and also older ones that have been updated. We can start with the European Strategy for Plastic in a Circular Economy and the Circular Economy Action Plan. So both of them, they include a plastic strategy for the EU. This plastic strategy itself contains all the other directive or legislation in blue. So you probably all know now the Plastic Bags Directive, the Single-Use Plastic Directive, and the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive, because we implement it in our daily lives. I think we all know now that we cannot use any more straws to drink or have cups and lids in plastic when we want to take away something to drink or to eat. It's the same for the Plastic Bags Directive. The aim is to reduce or forbid the use of lightweight plastic carriers, and I think we also all know this because now we all have different type of bags. In the same tone, in the same idea, there has been the revision of the directive and the reduction of the impact of certain plastic products on the environment in 2019. So it targets the use of single-use plastic and fishing gear containing plastic with measures to reduce their use or to ensure reusable alternatives that do not contain plastic. Then regarding microplastic, there has been a really interesting news because the EU Commission set the target to reduce microplastic pollution by 30% by 2030. It might be a bit ambitious, but the new tool to do this is really ambitious and concrete because it is under the REACH regulation on chemical substances that the EU institutions adopted new restrictions to the use of microplastic intentionally added to some products. For instance, the concrete action that will be put in place is the ban on and the prohibition of the sale of microplastics in many materials that we use in our daily lives. So for instance, in artificial sports surfaces, cosmetics, detergents, fabric softeners, fertilizers, toys, medicines, etc. So all these products won't be able to contain microplastics anymore. Of course, we can say that the problem with all those legislations is that the economic sector has to follow, the industries have to follow, so they need to put in place also themselves more economic solutions and viable for them to follow the policy aspect. Regarding the bio-based, biodegradable, and compostable plastic in 2022, there is only a communication from the European Union. So it means that it is not mandatory to respect the mentions regarding this, but at least the good point is that it sets down definitions, common definitions for all the EU members regarding bio-based, biodegradable, and compostable plastic. And I think you also know that, especially in science, that definition is a key principle to then after be able to put actions in common, because if we all have the same definitions, it's much easier to know what we're talking about and then to take concrete measures. So plastic is also being dealt with through waste management and waste shipments. It's the legislation you can see in green. So the first one, the most important maybe, is the delegated regulation on plastic waste shipment of 2021. Basically, it implements the Basel Convention that I mentioned earlier on hazardous waste transport. And concretely, it basically implements, just the same that is written in the International Convention. And it means that plastic waste that are hard to recycle will no longer be able to be exported to non-OECD countries, unless there is a precise procedure, but it is very rare. Again, as part of the EU Waste Management Law adopted in 2008, so it is quite old already, EU member states are requested to establish waste management plans and prevention programs. I think now in our regions where we live, we all know that our city, our regions, our local authority have a waste management plan. So this comes from this legislation, and the development of such plans and programs was also a component of the conditionalities for the attributions of some EU funds. So here it's an interesting example that shows that when there are clear conditions, states really manage to create actually those plans and to implement them. So it's also important. Yes, to have common definitions, yes, to have common ideas, yes, to have a political will, but then when there is something that actually obliges the stakeholders to take action, it is better because it does a better result. Then, as part of the EU Marine Strategy Framework Directive, also adopted in 2008, here, member states had to develop a maritime strategy adapted to their sub-regions, to their maritime regions, and in order to achieve a good environmental status of the marine environment of those sub-regions. And according to those criteria for actually evaluating the good environmental status, the 10th indicator for this is limiting the amount of marine litter. So we can see that since 2008 already, marine litter is slowly integrated into EU legislation, and it is used as an indicator of good environmental status. So it was only the beginning of the actions on marine litter. Even more recently, there has been the EU Action Plan towards zero pollution for air, water, and soils. That is a bit more general, that focuses more on improving water quality by reducing waste, plastic litter at sea by 50%, and microplastic released into the environment by 30%. So once again, it is also quite ambitious, but it covers a bit all the possibilities to reduce marine litter. Finally, in terms of EU legislation, it is very long, be brave, there's the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive of 1991. This directive aims at a better collection, treatment, and discharge of wastewater from urban and industrial sources. It is currently revised. The revision is from 2022. And it started a few days ago, and the European Parliament adopted the new revision, but now it still has to go under a process of political approval. So the idea is to reduce the use of biocarriers that are plastic filters used in wastewater treatment plants and then can be accidentally lost in the oceans or in the water. So it will improve the reduction of microplastic present in the end in the oceans. The only problem is that it is a directive, so who says directive says that member states have to implement them themselves with their own actions. So there might be delays to implement it, it might take a bit of time, maybe not all member states will have the same level of application, but it has the merit to exist. And besides EU legislations, there are initiatives and strategies that are currently being implemented and that have an impact on plastic pollution. So there's the Atlantic Strategy, that is a cooperation structure among France, Spain, Portugal, and Ireland that sets out 4 pillars of work, including which the pillar 4 that focuses on plastic pollution, among others. And it aims at monitoring plastic litter, collecting it, preventing its use. It also holds citizen science campaigns, etc. And it is quite an active group, but more at the high level, so really at the national level. So it might be limited because not all the stakeholders related to plastic pollutions are involved. So it is slow. And then recently the EU released global initiatives to respond to environmental needs, including which the Mission Ocean and Waters that aims at restoring the good state of the European waters by 2030. So this mission will help implementing and financing various projects on plastic pollution, especially on monitoring plastic litter, collecting, yes, once again, preventing, doing citizen science campaign, etc. So they are really concrete tools, but also, once again, more at the high level impact. So it is a bit difficult to say all the impact and what have this directive and legislation done, because many of them have been revised very recently, as you can see on the dates. So for the moment, we don't have a clear feedback, even though it should be, of course, quite positive. But as many of EU legislation, there will probably be differences between the implementation of one state and the other. So there might be not the same interest in all the EU member states. However, I would like to mention that the creation of a new tool, the Atlantic macro-region, would be a potential tool to reunite all of these directives, these legislations for reducing plastic pollution. Since a few years, the Atlantic states of the Atlantic Area Commission are working towards the creation of this macro-region that is a new cooperation structure, but that involves more stakeholders, so a multi-level cooperation structures, and like the Atlantic strategy, that is more high-level and at the national level. So it would reunite member states, regions, local authorities, and stakeholders from various sectors to put in common the same objectives for the sustainable development of the Atlantic area. There are already similar strategies for the Baltic Sea, for instance, or the Alpine regions, and they really allow to gather more funds, EU funds, and initiatives under one banner and to put in common all the efforts. Of course, those two initiatives with the Atlantic strategy and the potential new Atlantic macro-region, they would still coexist, but they would have a different approach. Both of them are important, but the Atlantic macro-region would have a more concrete approach on the ground. You are saved now from European policies, and we can see a bit more how it works at the national and even regional aspect. So basically, according to the degree of centralization and autonomy granting to regional authorities in each EU countries or in the UK, not all the regional authorities have the same powers in terms of reducing plastic pollution. All these countries, except the UK now, unfortunately, they have to implement the EU legislation. As I said before, they don't have all the same political willingness or capacities to implement. But there is a similar functioning when it comes to national implementation of European or national legislations. And basically in France, all regions have the responsibility of planning waste prevention. That includes circular economy measures. In Ireland, each region implements separately its waste management plan, and they focus particularly on the OSPAR Regional Action Plan on Marine Litter that I mentioned earlier. In Spain, regions have to elaborate a plan to manage waste, and Spanish coastal regions are particularly at the forefront of plastic pollutions to fight because there is a concentration of population in those areas, so it's a really important topic for them. In Portugal, regions act as the waste authorities and they supervise waste management operation along with the municipalities and police authorities. And Portugal particularly focuses on a circular economy, which is also a theme that comes back very often in EU national and regional policies. Finally, in Wales and in the UK in general, of course, they don't have to apply anymore the European legislations, but they are still quite similar. And they also participate to international working structure that have common objectives. So in the UK, each regional government has to develop their own management plan, and Wales, for instance, that is a member of the Atlantic Area Commissions, implements since 2010, so quite early, a zero waste strategy aiming at maximizing recycling and reducing the amount of waste produced. So with all this overview of international, European, and national legislation, you see that there are many initiatives at all levels, but in the end, maybe what all these initiatives need is a concrete implementation on the ground by more local level. So it is a bit what the Atlantic Area Commission is trying to focus on and trying to advocate. It is a bit based on this constatation that we are trying to explore solutions to really involve our member regions in projects, in initiatives, so they can have their own word to say on those legislations. I would say that the best example of governance that has been implemented in the Atlantic Area Commission is our Pledge on Ocean Pollution, adopted in May 2022. It is a joint political statement from 14 member regions composing the Atlantic Area Commission, and it aims at placing this region at the forefront of the fight against marine litter. This pledge, you could say that it's just an additional text on plastic pollution, but fortunately, it is not. This text has been implemented and seen as important as a tool for actions among other also initiatives. Let me explain a bit more. So basically, it has been embedded in the work of the Working Group on Ocean Pollution of the Atlantic Area Commission that is piloted by Norte region in Portugal. And in this declaration, and in this working group, regions are expressing their ambition to support the development of concrete actions and initiatives on the sustainable blue economy and on circular economy. It is also an initiative and a pledge registered in the future Atlantic macro-region that I also mentioned earlier, which would allow multi-level governance and cooperation to fund projects on the reduction of plastic pollution. And last but not least, the AAC Pledge on Ocean Pollution has been also adopted by the Mission Ocean and Waters that I mentioned earlier, because this pledge can only be effective if there is a strong multi-level governance at all levels and if displayed in various policies and actions. So this is really our main message is that when you have one political willingness, you really have to use the text, the declarations in your own work, because it shows that people actually want to work towards this and they can move towards less plastic. But this political vision that I mentioned also relies on concrete actions developed by the Atlantic Area Commission and all its partners. So first, I would say a very important project took place at the Atlantic area. It's the Clean Atlantic project. It is co-financed by the Interreg Atlantic Area Program. It lasted from 2016 to 2023, and it gathered 14 partners from Portugal, Spain, France, Ireland, and all the Atlantic area to develop scientific research, joint scientific research, even on the impact of marine litter on the ecosystem and biodiversity, as well as on the economic sectors. Through this project, it allowed to tackle marine litter in this area, so by joint scientific research, by creating knowledge tool, gathering all initiatives to reduce and tackle marine litter. And this project also contributed to the OSPAR Regional Action Plan on Marine Litter and the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, because all of the studies of Clean Atlantic, they fed the work of these two cooperation structures and this directive. Last but not least, for the Clean Atlantic project, the AIC, along with the partners, of course, developed the regional policy toolkit on marine litter. So this toolkit gathers good practices of the project, the technical practices like assessment of technologies for monitoring or removing macrolitter, databases, educational tool, beach cleans up, ports solution to reduce marine litter, etc. And regional and local authorities, they can get knowledge from these technical actions and then use them to create more adapted policies to their own needs. It also displays several examples of regional authorities passing new bills against single-use plastic, funding programs for the installation of tidal bins on the coast, also implementing new waste prevention and management plans that we mentioned earlier, because it shows that with those data obtained from the project, local authorities were able to plan better the reduction of plastic waste. So those examples clearly show how scientific knowledge can be the basis of a more political work that will have an impact on the citizens. This regional policy toolkit, of course, I invite you to go and read it, whether you are a scientist, a politician, a representative of an association, etc., because it can be used by everyone. And finally, the project has been a key pillar of the Atlantic Arc Commission work because our member regions adopted also the Cardiff Declaration in May 2023 to intend to build the new Atlantic macro-region with a priority topic on developing a circular economy value chain and also making participate all stakeholders to the reduction of plastic litter. So this project would be an important project to display and maybe to do again in the framework of the future, we hope, Atlantic macro-regions. The AAC has also been involved in the Blue Mission AA project that is part of the Mission Ocean and Waters that I mentioned earlier. I do a lot of recuperation of information. And in this project, the AAC will develop a reflection on how to align better the regional strategies of innovation and the objectives of the ocean mission, including a reduction of plastic pollution, but more on the innovation angle, the economic and industry angle this time. So what is coming for the Atlantic regions? Basically, our next step is to obtain a mandate from the EU institution to create the Atlantic macro-region because they are the ones who have the possibility at the political level to start the process of the creation of the macro-region. This would enable our Atlantic members to reinforce their legislations and initiatives on plastic pollution. So the AAC will continue to take part in EU cooperation projects and plastic pollution and marine litter. So as a conclusion, I would really like to recall the importance of a multi-level governance, Atlantic, but not only, on plastic pollution that involves the EU, the states, members or non-members of the EU, regions, local authorities, and various stakeholders, scientific associations, citizens even, because they have their role to play. This would be a way to reduce and tackle marine pollution more efficiently. Indeed, the scientific research and local initiatives exist, but they need to be put together with the political willingness to implement flagship initiatives on the overall Atlantic and more general, globally speaking. So the AAC is convinced that the creation of the Atlantic macro-region is an important step to take, and we call the Council of the EU to give the mandate for its creation within the Spanish presidency. So yes, I really invite you to contact me if you have any questions, and I also invite you to read all the documents that you can find here, if you will, so you can have a bit more information and a recap on what I say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mathilde, for this very nice review of all the policies. And I think this is a perfect starting point for the discussion that is coming, because we are always saying that there are no enough legislation, and now we have seen that they are already, especially in Europe, there is a very nice set of policies about plastic pollution, and the idea is to start to talk in the implementation and the coordination of those policies in each of the countries. So now we will move to the second part of the event, that will be the discussion panel. So I will ask to all the panelists, please, to move to the table. To Mathilde also, please. You already know Mathilde, so I will ask to all the panelists to have a short self-introduction. I also would like to introduce Cynthia Gomez, who is the project manager of the LabPlas project, and who will be now moderating the discussion in this second part. So,
thank you very much for the presentation. As Natalia mentioned, it's quite interesting to have such a broad idea of all the different policies currently in place. So now, to continue with the second part of the event, I would like to ask each panelist to please introduce yourselves.
Hi, thank you. My name is Gary Kett. I'm a multidisciplinary marine ecologist. I'm coming from Ireland, but I'm currently based in the CIIMAR Institute in Porto, where I'm working on the Maelstrom project, which is a Horizon 2020 project to sustainably manage and remove our marine litter. I have spent the last 2 years being the All-Atlantic Ocean Youth Ambassador representing Ireland, which has given me great insight into youth, early career researchers, different stakeholders from all various sectors such as fisheries, aquaculture, ports. And it's given me a really good opportunity to listen to the concerns and opportunities that exist within our society, and it's been very exciting. As part of my ambassadorship with Ireland, we last year, in terms of the 10-year celebration of the Galway signing agreement, my colleagues and I decided to form an All-Atlantic Plastics Pilot Network, which is a network of early career researchers who are devoted to improving the connectivity of different stakeholders across the Atlantic involved in plastic reduction, production, cleanups, citizen science, and policy. So it's an exciting initiative just taking off, but please reach out to us if you want more information. And yeah, it's a great initiative, a great place to be in. And I would just like to say as a closer for that we focus a lot on capacity building and knowledge transfer, and of course it's very important. But I really want to highlight that there is so much capacity already attainable within society. There's a great energy, there's great momentum, and we really need to capitalize that and really galvanize it and build with that. So move forward in that into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Ricardo?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ricardo Beiras. I see many familiar faces here. I teach marine pollution in the Faculty of Marine Science here in the University of Vigo. In my research line, I try to develop practical tools to study marine pollution, and specifically the effects on marine organisms, the effects of pollution. And this research was useful in the past for a quite large GPI Oceans funded project, which was ECIMAT, where we tried to study the effects of plastics on marine ecosystems. Some of the results of ECIMAT, I think, deserve some more attention, because this is typical of we scientists. We start with a project, we work a lot on a project, and then we move to the next project without exploiting the results we got from the previous one. So that's something we should avoid. So I think we should revisit some of these effects, and in the next few minutes in the debate I will revisit some of these results, because probably not everyone agrees with them. So I think it's good for a debate. And now I'm coordinating LabPlas. That's why I'm here, and it's a pleasure to have the responsibility to coordinate this large H2020 project with 17 partners. So I thank a lot Natalia, the efforts, and the Center, the efforts to organize this side event. And yeah, it will be a pleasure to try to ask the questions you wish, or to take part in this debate. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Begoña?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me here. My name is Begoña Espiña. I'm a researcher. I'm a marine biologist. In fact, I come from an institution that is located in Braga, in Portugal. It's an intergovernmental institution funded by Spain and Portugal, and is based mostly in nanotechnology. And in our part of the work related with plastics, we participate in several projects. Among them, we are partners in LabPlas. And in this project, we develop new methodologies for extraction, separation, and analysis of micro and nanoplastics. And we lead the work package that deals with the, let's say, challenges, big challenges in analytics for plastics. We are very much interested in participating in this debate. Obviously, because of my background, I'm very much as well concerned about the possible toxicological effects and ecological and ecosystem effects. We participate a bit in this part as well in LabPlas project, evaluating toxicity to certain models. And I'm very curious about what we will get from this discussion. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Begoña. Willem?
Yes, thank you also from my side to the host, to the Air Center specifically for having us here today. So my name is Willem de Moor. I'm Deputy Director at JPI Oceans. And for those of you who don't know JPI Oceans, we are a pan-European initiative aiming to coordinate marine and maritime research around Europe. You know, there are a lot of pan-European initiatives. What distinguishes us from some of the others is that our members are research funding agencies and ministries around Europe who have the capacity to decide on joint priorities and in the context of JPI Oceans on what we call joint actions. And those joint actions can range from setting up experts groups to joint procurement, to research infrastructure sharing, and also to the implementation of joint calls. And I can say that in the topic of microplastics, we have been certainly one of the pioneers on the research front, starting first of all with addressing or investigating what the actual knowledge gaps were back in 2013, and then launching a first joint call for proposals, which led then to the funding of 4 projects, one of which Professor Beiras has already alluded to, the FMRA project. So we funded that first round of project that was then followed up with a second round of projects, which started from 2020 till 2023. So they are ending their work right now. And one of the aspects which we are looking at right now, and also before as well, is looking specifically at the knowledge transfer. How can we transfer the results of these projects to the policy level? So that's also one of the things I think we can perhaps discuss later on. So I'll close there, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Mathilde? Or already? Yes, sorry, you already introduced yourself. Yes. So maybe to start with the discussion, we can, just for having some context, Ricardo, maybe you want to say what is the extent of plastic pollution in the world's oceans, and what are the specific sources and types of plastics contributing to this pollution?
Yes, okay, but before I would like to start with already a topic that perhaps is good to raise some debate. As Natalia said at the very beginning, it's very difficult to organize an event with no plastics. No? You said it. I would say that it's not necessary, because plastics are quite useful materials, actually. So some plastics save energy because they are lighter than alternative packaging. Other plastics are very, very useful for medical devices, very important in human health. So probably the main problem of plastic, of conventional plastics, is that it's too cheap. So we produce so much because it's that much cheap that now we have too much in the environment. But it's not. The problem is not to have artificial polymers, which are really useful, and I hope we will always have artificial polymers in the society because they have very important roles. The problem is probably the chemicals we put in those artificial polymers. And one example which is very clear is plastic caps, which has been restricted in the single-use plastic directive. So now we have these kind of things, like this, paper cups. But obviously paper can't stand water. So this, if you pay attention, they say here in very small letters, say plástico en el producto, which means they do have plastic. Okay, inside, it's lined by plastic, otherwise they cannot hold water, okay? So a recent study from an Indian group published in, I think it was in Environmental Science and Technology, showed that if you put hot water here, the amount of microplastics that it produces, this lining, is huge. It's probably higher than if all the cap was made of polyethylene. I don't know. That's just my. But actually, this produces lots of microplastics. So I think it's a good example that this is not a sort of Walt Disney film where we have the bad guy, the good guy. So plastic is the bad guy, okay? And so we really need to think why plastic is the bad guy and take out of the plastic the things that make it the bad guy. And one of these things is chemicals. The United Nations Environmental Programs have recently issued a very interesting report on chemicals in plastics, which is very interesting. So that's in my view the main focus. It's a problem of chemicals, and we should target that. But anyway, that was just an issue to raise perhaps some debate afterwards. But what you said, Cynthia, is that the extent of plastic pollution in the world ocean. That's something that the projects that Willem mentioned and many other projects try to focus, try to measure, try to record. The main problem we scientists found is that there were not clear standard methods to sample plastic. So many institutions made a very strong effort to standardize methods. Otherwise, each group publishes studies which only that group can repeat because the methods are individual for that particular group. So now we have some guidelines, and OSPAR produced guidelines, and several institutions. So we made an effort there for standardization. All plastics that end up in the environment, as you probably know, fragment, get into small pieces because of UV light, because of temperature, because of physical stress. So at the end, the main source of microplastics in the environment is macro, is the big litter. So the main problem is that urban waste, the macro, the garbage, the litter, sometimes is mismanaged and ends up in the environment because of these problems. And since obviously the ocean is global and the movements, the currents move plastics thousands of kilometers, so we don't need to, we cannot solve the problem in, I don't know, in Galicia or in Spain or in Portugal, because that's not the point. We need to solve the problem globally. And Mathilde provided examples of legislations that try to do larger, this how do you call it, large Atlantic region, or? Yeah, because it's probably the larger the unit of study, the better, to solve these issues. So at this moment we have a problem of mismanagement of solid waste, fragmentation of this solid waste in the water, production of microplastics. Okay, up to here we all agree. And now comes something which perhaps not all agree. When we compare the concentrations of microplastics in the oceans with the concentrations that in the laboratory are toxic for marine fauna, we found that the risk is negligible. It's very small. At this moment, the levels of microplastics in the oceans do not pose a risk to marine ecosystems. Does it mean that we don't care then? Obviously not. Obviously not. That means, in my view, that we are in time to solve the problem. It's not too late. So now we need to to take more care and not to make the plastic end up in the ocean. If we can do that, we can solve the problem, because so far levels are not as big as sometimes people think. No? I'm not saying that obviously many marine macrofauna, obviously we are all aware of effects of ghost fishing, okay? We didn't cover all those effects. I was talking about microplastics specifically. So for short, the extension of plastic pollution is very big. It's much higher than we should, because we don't manage correctly the solid waste mainly. There is also the problem of littering, but I think nowadays people is very aware of this problem of littering and more or less behaves. But we are in time to solve this problem, because so far the amounts of microplastics in the ocean are many orders of magnitude below those that scientists in the laboratory find that they cause problems at levels of plankton, at levels of fish, at level of small organisms. For example, everyone knows that microplastics get into the food web. No? Okay, that's true. Animals ingest the microplastics, but fortunately they also ingest them. They don't remain inside the animals. Okay, so you can consume fish, you can consume shellfish. It's not a danger at all in terms Can be a danger for other reasons, but not for microplastics.
Thank you, Ricardo. Then perhaps we can continue exploring these impacts on both the economics and the environment. So, Begoña, could you please explore more on what are the economic and environmental impacts of plastic pollution on marine ecosystems and coastal communities, and how can these impacts be quantified and mitigated?
Very complex question. Well, I'm not an economist, obviously. I read some reports, and I can talk a little bit about what I've been reading and what is the state of knowledge right now, or maybe some years ago, because the reports usually go out when you already have new proofs of new science or new numbers. In terms of economic impact, there have been several reports regarding evaluating which is the cost or the possible cost of having marine litter, and some of them raised some amounts such as $13 billion per year. This is, I don't know if how precise is the estimation, and if it's including even the cost of, for instance, healthcare that could be related to some effects or side effects of the exposure to plastics. But again, these are numbers that are constantly evolving, and most probably we will have more recent reports or coming soon. Then in terms of environmental impact, there are several layers that you can think about. The first layer that you can think about is ecological. So the interaction, physical or chemical interaction of the plastics with the organisms can pose a risk, can even impact positively in some cases. For instance, in the case of some bacteria or microalgae that use these plastics to colonize surfaces and travel around the world could be even positive, not so positive if these are invasive species. So there are some other side effects, but there are as well effects related with ecosystems and the services that we get from the ecosystems. For instance, the use of aquaculture. We know that a great part of our protein intake, I think is 20% as an average, but it is much better, much higher in certain areas, of course, in coastal areas, comes from seafood. And the seafood is exposed to plastics. There can be physical effects such as entanglements, there can be ingestion of plastics. Maybe this is not so toxic, this is more physical, mechanical effect, but it affects certainly the industry. And then we have as well social impacts. In terms of social impacts, maybe we can think about tourism. And it has been evaluated by several organizations, which is the impact of not taking action in having plastic pollution, for instance, in beaches. And it's huge when you realize about the numbers. So these all together have to be taken into account in order to perfectly assess which is the economical and as well the health impact of the marine pollution in waters. Mitigation is more complicated. We know that mostly the strategy comes with reduce, reuse, and recycle. Obviously, we are working in all possible branches of this. Reduce is not only purchasing less and consuming less, that it's a good part of it, or avoiding single-use plastics, but as well, for instance, to take action in industries to reduce the amount of plastic that is contained in, for instance, in packaging. And this is another way of doing it. Obviously, recycling, it's a milestone for European Union and globally to increase the amount of recycled plastic. I think it's, according to Green Deal, something like raising up to 55% in 2030. But yeah, this are I think the main strategies that are being in this moment taking place.
Thank you, Begoña. So we've heard about the problem of plastic pollution now and what are the economic and environmental impacts. And Mathilde, during your presentation, you mentioned quite a large list of different policies to address this. And some of them are quite recent, as you mentioned, just from last year and so on. However, how do you think these regulations and monitoring compliance on a global scale is working, and what would be the expected outcomes, and how can these challenges be addressed?
So for some of them, it is quite hard to actually evaluate their impact on plastic pollution because they don't only mention plastic pollutions. I think we will be really able to assess the impact of international treaties on plastic pollution once, we hope, the treaty on plastic pollution is adopted. What I could say is that at the international level, even at the European level, and I agree with what my colleague said, is that usually they are quite general, the agreements. We really need political involvement on the local ground, and also we need more economic levers, more involvement from the industry, but this is quite hard to get because they need to make money, it's a fact. So it's quite hard to have them involved more in the process of reducing plastic pollution, or even to find other materials, because as you said, not all plastic materials are bad to use. So they really need to make more research on that. So maybe that's the limit of international conventions, that they don't see this aspect, that they mainly focus on the reduction, the recycling, but behind this we need a real investment, political but also economic investment, to create actually facilities to reduce, to find new particles, to recycle. And this is really hard because many initiatives need more investment, more funding, so it is really complicated to implement. So we need more economic levers, more also definitions, common definitions on all type of plastics, on what is reducing plastic pollution, what is recycling. So we still need a lot of work to be done, even though it is quite promising for the moment, but yeah, there's big steps to take.
Thank you, Mathilde. And Willem, during your introduction, you mentioned that within JPI Oceans there was also the need for knowledge transfer. And so what are the challenges and limitations in enforcing these plastic pollution regulations that Mathilde mentioned, and how to monitor compliance on a global scale, and how can these challenges be addressed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're quite far from compliance on a global scale yet. We're still negotiating, of course, the global plastics treaty. I think some of the challenges were alluded to already by the other panelists, by Ricardo and by Mathilde. I think standardization is a big one. There is still no standardization in reporting on plastic production in the first place, but also pollution. So at the moment, I mean, we have made a lot of strides at the European scale on that. Also, for example, on the harmonization of monitoring of microplastics and in the marine environment. But there is still, certainly at a global level, a lot of progress that we can make there. Secondly, I think also there is also no standardization yet at the producers level. So you have all the producers making different or using different compounds, using different additives, etc., which makes it obviously more difficult from the recycling side, but also then looking at the monitoring side afterwards. So I think that's two main challenges that we see. I would like also to advocate for more evidence-based policy making and regulations. I think Ricardo has really put it right on the spot here. Sometimes we really have to avoid that we just displace some of these impacts from plastics to another material. With the cup here was a good example. I think the cotton bags, which you get now everywhere, are another example where it's clear that you have to reuse them hundreds or even thousands of times to alleviate the impact that they have on for example, other impacts on wastewater, etc., on pollutions, more terrestrial pollutions, etc. So I think there is really a clear need for evidence-based policy making, looking that we don't displace these impacts from plastics to other materials, to other types of pollutions. And I had another point which I forgot now, but I'll come back to that later.
I'll come back. Yeah. Thank you. Gary, and as co-founder of the All-Atlantic Plastic Pilot Network, what do you think is missing to implement science-based solutions for citizens, policymakers, and the industry sector interested in ocean health?
Yeah, sure. Nice general question. So, of course, my colleagues have alluded to a lot of the current lacking structures already. So harmonization is a huge thing. Really getting proper buy-in from industry and getting good adoption of the knowledge that we currently have and bringing that into fruition with all the complexities that come with it. So I suppose one of the main things I'd really like to see is increased channels of communication. So more direct lines that are open, accessible, transparent between the scientific community and the political community, of course. But also across the board, the whole science policy society interface really needs a better connectivity and better channels of communication. Funnily, I was also actually inspired by Natalia's struggle to get a glass bottle. Everybody faces that same struggle sometimes, and it's not always the right solution you get, but currently you don't really have anywhere to voice that concern or that annoyance, and as a consumer you should have an ability to do that. So opening up these kind of fora, or they could take any form as well on the local level. You could have town meetings and regulatory meetings with local policymakers. So I think that kind of opening up communication, opening up dialogue is very important. It's a first step, of course. We'd need a lot of follow-up action and implementation of these voices that we hear throughout society in all different sectors. So I think that's going to be key, at least in the start of getting things on the ground, off the ground. I also completely agree that we need better buy-in of the policies that we have, that they are actually implemented. So we have a lot of policies, but to get them implemented is a struggle. There's a financial issue to it. There's also an understanding issue. There's a complexity when it becomes plastics. So these are the kind of things that within our Atlantic Plastic Pilot Network we're trying to provide as a service, as a scientific service for corporations, for businesses, to point them straight away to the evidence, for companies that want to improve their ESR, that we can actually show them what policies work, what don't, because they are context specific and they're individual to certain regions or production methods. So I think that's a service that's lacking for businesses who want to do well, or for regions who want to implement international policies. They can be quite difficult. So bridging that gap, I suppose, would be one of our kind of goals within the network. Another area I do find is lacking, not totally missing, but the rollout of new technologies and new methods, and really integrating those in our educational platforms at all levels, but particularly in local sectors, so our ports and our harbours, that people are trained and comfortable with the methods, whether it's removal methods or cleanup methods. And we've seen great results from this within the Maelstrom project, where we involved our local stakeholders, especially the fishing community, from the very early on. We didn't go there with our expertise looking for their help. We went there looking for their expertise, providing our service. And I think we got really good feedback from that. We initially were only looking for approval to install the bubble barrier technology, but really they started on their own initiative, doing their own fishing for litter campaigns, and we got a really good feedback just from on the ground level, getting in there with the local stakeholders and kind of just working together as opposed to a hierarchical nature. So I found that very effective. And that goes for across the board within schools and within youth and training programs. I think we need to be, once we have our methods standardized and harmonized, that we're really sharing that and getting that out there and hoping for good uptake, because harmonized methods is only harmonized if it's really integrated into the scientific community and all of those who avail of it. So those are the first few things I would like to see filled in.
Thank you, Gary. So maybe we can continue with Begoña or Ricardo on how can technology and innovation be harnessed to develop sustainable alternatives to single-use plastics and improve waste management systems in coastal regions and maritime activities.
I don't know if you planned some questions from the public now? Or
Yeah, we can.
Please feel
Definitely.
free, otherwise we talk a lot.
Definitely.
Feel free to raise your hand and make questions if you wish. Huh?
As well as
because I think I think we are going very fast through some topics which
we can also discuss.
Perhaps we should talk a little bit more.
Yeah.
For example, there was something that Mathilde mentioned in her presentation that surprised me, because in science, like in all fields of life, there are fashions, and now is the fashion of circularity. And I think it is very important people to give a thought about this issue. Now everything has to circulate, but please be aware that energy can circulate, okay, because it's against thermodynamics. So energy cannot be recovered. Once you spend energy, you cannot recover it. So what can be circular is matter, but energy can never be circular. So it's much more important to spend less energy than try to recover energy, because energy can very hardly be recovered because of the first principle of thermodynamics. Now we have this fashion of circularity, and I think it was talking about plastics, it might stem from the interest with recycling, which is a very fair interest, but it's very important to keep in mind that reducing is the first R. Okay, and recycling is the third one. Okay, so we have reduce, reuse, and recycle. So if we can reduce, it's much better than recycle. And one good example of this was the Lego company, the company of toys for children. Okay, because recently they made a study because they plan to switch. These construction toys, Lego, because I don't know the English pronunciation of Lego. It's okay? Okay, so it's a very serious company, so they made a study about the possibility to change the materials of their pieces, okay, which are a very strong polymer called ABS, which is obviously an oil-based, non-recyclable polymer, okay? So they studied the possibility to make the pieces with PET, with recycled PET. And they found out that it would be a mistake, because recycling PET is much more energy consuming and had a larger carbon footprint than producing the ABS. So that's, in my view, that's a very good example of the dangers of this famous circularity, that now everything has to be circular. Okay, it has to be circular if it's worth, but some things is not worth to make them circular. So if you spend more energy, if you make a larger carbon footprint, it doesn't make sense to recycle that material. It's much better to use it, make it probably as much durable as possible, so you reduce consumption, okay, which is the first one, R, I insist, is the most important one. Obviously, reduction for industry, okay, reduction and industry perhaps don't fit very well, because industry needs a lot of consumption, okay? And we are all obsessed with growth mania and with PIB and these things. And okay, that's far beyond my expertise. But it's good to think that we scientists must produce the knowledge for institutions to make the right decisions. And I think Willem said something very interesting, that we need evidence-based regulations, because otherwise we can make mistakes in changing too quickly from some products to the others with very little information, with not solid enough information. I don't know if you remember perhaps 15 years ago, when the standard lamps were restricted, they launched in the market very big lamps, which when you switch them on, they flash a little bit at the beginning, okay? So they were low energy consumption lamps, which were supposed to be the ecological ones, okay? And they replaced the old, nice and low energy consuming, well, high energy consuming, but no metal pollution producing ones. And those new ones had plenty of mercury. So they produced tons and tons of these new lamps because, okay, they consume less energy, but they had mercury inside. So after very quickly, some months, a few years after those new lamps were launched to the market, they disappeared because they realized that they were much worse than the old ones. Okay, so now, okay, we have the right ones. But what I mean is that if these new lamps, these alternative lamps, would have had a strong scientific study underneath concerning a priori risk assessment, for example, they would have discovered that this had this problem of mercury. They didn't do that because they needed to change very quickly. They needed to launch a new green product in the market, and they made a mistake. So in summary, I think we need to have a lot of scientific evidence before making this kind of proposals, because some of you know that I say this every time, polyethylene is one of the least toxic materials that you can find. I mean, it's difficult to imagine a material less toxic than polyethylene because it doesn't react. It's biologically inactive. So it's impossible to have any biological effect. So polyethylene is one of the safest materials. Obviously, it has a big problem that it doesn't disintegrate. It's not biodegradable. But before changing polyethylene by another product, please make sure that this new product is not toxic. Otherwise, the cure is going to be worse than the disease, and that would be a big mistake, no? I recently, sorry, I'm taking a lot of time. So
No
I talk a lot, so that's why if you stop me, that would be great. But
do you have a question?
So, as you were mentioning polyethylene and what a good material it is because it does not react with other substances, would you say that maybe it's a problem sometimes, maybe this is also linked with policy, that sometimes these products are judged based only on one criteria without taking into account other criteria that may also be influence the equation? Because, for instance, if polyethylene does not biodegrade, maybe it's not such a bad thing because you don't. If it ends up at sea, it won't biodegrade into microplastics. It will remain a large chunk of inert plastic. Maybe that's not such a bad thing after all. So you have to take into account many things like energy, as you mentioned, energy consumption, recyclability, toxicity of the products, and so on.
In my view, I will be as short as possible. In my view, it's not a bad thing that it doesn't degrade if we use it to make durable objects, not single-use objects, which is, no point. So yeah, it's good. In fact, plastic industry made a big effort to produce polymers which are durable, because they need to be durable for many applications. So in my view, that will be one of the keys, because if it's durable, you reduce, because if you buy one of those refillable bottles, you can use it for years, so you don't need to spend, to use single-use plastics. So yeah, the durability is something that could be targeted. And then check the issue of chemicals, of course.
Yes, it's a very interesting question because from the policy aspect, the problem is that one policy is made at one moment in life. So it is made available, this policy, based on the knowledge that we have at this precise moment. A few years after, when the scientific community, for instance, gathers more knowledge on one aspect or the other, then the policy, the legislation needs to be changed. But it takes a lot of time. It's a very long procedure. So you're right. Indeed, often a policy is made on one or several criteria, but then other criteria, such as durability of plastic, for instance, is not taken into account. This is a big drawback of many policies, but that's why more regional-based and local-based projects are really important, precisely to gather more information on this topic and to have more scientific knowledge, and also to, in the end, after this project, pass messages to legislators, even at the EU level, so that they can adapt always those new legislations. But yeah, it's a very long process, so it's always difficult to adapt, because in some areas it's very easy to adapt because you can change the direction very easily. In policy level, in policy area, it is much more complicated.
Yeah. So I don't know if there are any more questions from the public. Otherwise, yeah, not very sure what's going on. Sorry. Otherwise, yeah, and I don't know if anyone else from the panelists wants to say something regarding this.
Maybe very quickly, I think
yes.
one of the recent, or sort of continuing the discussion which you had earlier, for example, the example with the lamps that Ricardo has mentioned, one of our projects most recently presented some of its results, the response project, I think, in which you are part as well, which interestingly found out that some of these biodegradable plastics in the marine environment are more toxic than the let's say the chemical type of plastics. So it is quite interesting to see that some of these alternatives are indeed better or worse than what we actually use at the moment. So we have to be very careful in trying to shift our focus now into other materials which might, certainly then in the marine environment, be more toxic than the original. So, yeah.
Yes, and again we have this problem, but this is perhaps only mainly of interest of we scientists, it's not as much a public interest, but sometimes there is this problem that we make a research project, we come up with lots of results and we try to publish those results, but much of those results remain never published, never discussed, never compared with other groups doing similar things. So I would say that for funding agencies, perhaps it would be interesting. For example, I said at the beginning to Willem that I missed, because of personal reasons, I missed the Galway meeting where all GPI oceans meet together. That kind of meetings are very, very important in my view, because are the very few instances where you can discuss your results with people that is doing very similar things in other projects. And normally we don't have that opportunity because we are in our labs. Okay, you have the scientific meetings, and yeah, sometimes you can do, okay, but specifically projects for a common goal with similar approaches, it will be very, in my view, it will be very fruitful to put those people together, to fund them, because sometimes you don't have even money to travel, but that's not lots of resources, that's not that much. And to make this kind of events where people that have been facing the same problem can meet and exchange results, and that will make a big step forward. Another example that comes to my mind, and very clear, and Willem also mentioned it, is the problem of standards for microplastics. I remember very well when we met the very first time in Madrid with the very first call of GPI Oceans projects for microplastics. People discuss a lot, and it was the very beginning of the first call for projects for microplastics. People discuss a lot on, okay, do we have standards? Because obviously if a chemist makes an analysis, okay, the chemist needs standards, otherwise cannot start working. Okay, so do we have standards for microplastics? No, we don't. So who is going to make the standards for microplastics? And several labs who had the technology's capacity said, okay, perhaps we can do it. And now it's 8 years later, we don't have very few. There is a very large European project which is called EurOCEAN Charms, some of you probably know, which is trying to do that, but it's a huge challenge as far as I know. Perhaps you know better, but it's a huge challenge and progress is limited because you have the problem of polymers, but that's only one polymer because you have the problem of size, the problem of additives, you know, so it's really challenging to produce standards, and the smaller you go, the more challenging it is. So I think most research groups that make research on microplastics had the very same problem. So probably if we have met more regularly, we will find solutions or at least find some alternatives common to several groups, and that will be, I think, very useful. So in my view, exploiting the results of the research projects is an aim by itself that needs to be funded. And when I say funded, I'm not saying that it needs lots of resources, but it's something that is worth doing and is, I think, is very useful to exploit really the results of the projects.
Yeah. And probably also not considering that one solution is the solution for everything, because plastic pollution has various issues and various problems, and each one should be addressed differently. No? So yeah, maybe biodegradable and bio-based products in marine ecosystems are more toxic than normal PET, but that does not mean now we're going to put it in the black box and not consider them, because for another alternatives they could still be important. No? So it's important also in the same way when talking about policies, that one policy is not the umbrella for everything, because each problem is different. So to take that into consideration as well. So I don't know if there are any more questions from the public or...
A final question to all the panelists just before the wrap up of the session, and is from your point of view of experience in all the different fields you are working in, what will be that, what it is missing regarding to beat plastic pollution? I mean, when I ask that, is from your point of view as scientists, from the ecotoxicology, from the point of view from policy, from a point of view of money to fund project. What is that part that you consider, you always think we will need to have that? So I would like to ask you that, just to end and summarize, and then we will proceed with the wrap up. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, I'll try to summarize to finish up. Just first of all, I couldn't agree more that the plastic isn't the problem. It's not a plastic problem we have, but really an overconsumption problem and a waste management problem. So these are completely human endeavors that we can curtail without blaming a chemical or a polymer, you know. So, but that's a very complex thing, and plastic. The plastic problem is an unusual one because it's I said the first real environmental issue to be taken off within the media and to be a real social media issue. So I would love to see an increased capacity for building that connection between scientists, between the holders of this knowledge that isn't being utilised, with our journalists, with our media enterprises, so that things aren't sensationalized too much, things aren't blown out of proportion a little bit, and we've kind of less disinformation, because there's a lot of it going around, I suppose, especially more so with social media, but it can be combated with traditional media. And that will work as well for policies, for advertising policies, for maybe showcasing where policies are being implemented and aren't, or by whom, and these are all would be very beneficial things to focus on. And just briefly as a second thing, I would completely agree that the capacity within scientists isn't being properly utilised. The last 2 days we were in Santiago de Compostela at another side event for early career ocean professionals within the EMB, and we really spent 2 days trying to rack our heads on how we would improve the uptake of our science, of our research, and how to create these bridges between policymakers so that we can get our information across, including all the complexities that they come with and all the side issues. But these are the two main gaps I would love to see addressed, really, is science to policy and bringing in policy language training into scientists, and then just bringing up more of these forums and symposias. I think would be really useful to really capitalise on what we have. So that's about it.
Yes, well, I think what the question was something like what do we miss, no, Cynthia? What's the
Yes. What is the gap within your area?
Yeah, well, more than in my area, in general, in plastics, what I miss is well, it's not only in plastics, but critical thinking by the public in terms of not following something just because it's fashionable, or not trusting some product because it has a green label, or you know, or because it has a flower, a very nice flower on the package. Okay, but paying the effort to go a little beyond that, and trying to see what does it mean, what is the meaning of that label, what is the use of that product, because sometimes we don't use the products, or we don't dispose the products like they should be disposed. You know, so sometimes I agree that labels are too complex, so one doesn't know. For example, if it has a compost in the garden, and there are so many labels with flowers that you don't know if you can put the bag in the compost just because it has a label. You know that because there is industrial compost, home compost, soil. Okay, I don't know how many. So yeah. It's difficult, so it takes effort for the public to know how to dispose that, no? And we cannot, I mean, people cannot be an expert in everything to know what do I do with this object, no? It's too much. But I think, I mean, I trust a lot in public, in critical thinking by the public. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult, because obviously companies need to sell. Reducing is something that it doesn't sound good for a business company, and I understand it, because they need to increase sales and everything. So I think it's the public who can more or less solve this issue, or has the tools to solve this, I think.
Okay, from my point of view, what I think that is clearly missing from what I can see is clear ontology and definition. I'm telling this because it's affecting as well even regulation or even directives. We are putting in the same level substances, chemicals, and plastics. And plastics, in most part of the cases, is a product already that is composed of many different components. It's very difficult to create real good science and based on real risk assessment without having a full composition of what is contained in this plastic. So we need to take into account that we name plastics by the polymer, but the base polymer is in many cases, as Ricardo commented, or in most part of the cases, not the problem. The problem are the other components. So if we are putting side by side bisphenol A, for instance, as a target compound that we need to monitor in waters, in products, because it's endocrine disruptor and so on. And on the other side, plastics is not equivalent at all. We need to take this into account, and I think this is not correctly transmitted to the public or even to all the estimates in science and policy-based regulation. This is, for me, from my side, this is the first thing that I would like to see recognized. And the other part that I would like to comment is that many times we have this or pull or push of science-based policy making. So many times scientists are producing data that raise an awareness, and then there is policy making because of this awareness. In the case of the plastics, I feel that it's a little bit the other way around, that because of public awareness, there is a pull, and we are not forced, it's our role to do that. But we need to provide elements for this policy making. But as I already commented, this is very complex. We are dealing with products that are composed of many things. So we need to be a little bit patient because there are many things that are missing yet to have the proper analytics to know exactly what it is a problem in the environment. We see this, for instance, in the case of, now it is very much commented about nanoplastics. There has been research since a decade or so in microplastics. There are some evidences, and now we are moving to the smaller scale. Of course, going down to the scale could pose a higher risk to the organisms because they can be internalized in our organisms. But we still don't know, we still don't have the proper analytics to know if there are nanoplastics in significant amounts in the environment. So we need to be a little bit patient and not to put, let's say, the car in front of the horses. And this, yes, I would like to see this. I think it's missing.
Thank you. What I'm at least hoping for 2024 is a very strong global plastics treaty, of course evidence-based as we discussed before. And in that regard, I think two things which we haven't really discussed in detail today, but which were mentioned in a recent UNEP report were a virgin plastics tax that could be part of that treaty, for example, or could be implemented at national level. And that tax could then be used for waste management, but also to incentivize companies to rather use or to rather recycle rather than always using virgin plastics. Of course, we might run into other problems there, as you have alluded to before as well. But I think that could be an avenue that we could explore. Another one which seems to work quite well in some countries, not always in others, is extended producer responsibility, basically having the producers being responsible for the full life cycle of their products. Basically also it's a form of tax where the producers give away part of their resources, usually which goes into a separate managed fund, which looks then at, for example, the cleanup or removal of plastics in the environment, etc., and also at recycling, of course. So that are two things, I think, which could be rolled out still at a global scale, but of course have to be rolled out in a way that actually works. We see, I think, certainly on the latter, on the producer responsibility, we see examples where it actually does work in some countries. In other countries, it's less successful. So we really have to evaluate those policies and see how they can be rolled out effectively at global level. So I'll close there. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pretty difficult question because choosing only two elements that lack in policies is pretty complicated because it's very, very mixed with many other elements. But I would say that maybe what would be really interesting to implement a bit more is the polluter pays principles. So this would allow to involve much more maybe industries and economic actors in the process of researching more for new solutions that are adapted actually to the current needs and that also avoid going only in one direction, as you say. So for instance, removing all types of plastics, no, but making more research from the industry's part to do to create new cycles for plastic creation, new materials that are actually really sustainable. And the second element maybe that lacks a bit are economic levers because many European legislation ask regional, local authorities, even member states to actually put in place new measures, but many of them don't have the financial resources to do so. This is, of course, very complicated because there are so many initiatives on everything, not only on plastic pollution, to put in place that we cannot finance everything, but I would say that maybe putting more in common funds would allow to really implement better the policies.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much to all the members of the panel. I think that we have had it's a short discussion actually for a big problem or a big topic, but at least with this discussion we have some ideas about how to follow for the future.